Welcome to Muslims and Mental Health with Sister Heather, a groundbreaking program looking at mental health issues through the biopsychosocial spiritual paradigm.
In honor of African American History Month, Muslims on Mental Health will be doing a few episodes, particularly of interest to the African American Muslim population. The African American Muslims make up about 45% of the American Muslim population, so they're quite a significant group in the American landscape. And today we'll be looking at confronting racism and stigma in the African American Muslim community. Later on, I will be joined by a guest, Margari Hill, who's the co-founder of Muslim Arc, which is an organization that seeks to address issues like racism. At this point, I will begin this episode by discussing key concepts like stigma, microaggressions, racism, and community psychology. When we look at what community psychology is, we're looking at values for personal well-being, values for relational well-being, and values for the collective well-being. Community psychologists are concerned with the issues and problems facing disadvantaged people, problems that have deep historical roots. The journeys of disadvantaged people have been ones of pain, suffering, and dislocation, and colonization, oppression, and marginalization. Society has constructed narratives that take the stories of disadvantaged males and females and made them into a people that are, quote, different from you and me. These stories are called dominant cultural narratives. These dominant cultural narratives are often the type that are victim blaming, and they help the dominant groups to rationalize their continuing contributions to the oppression of the disadvantaged, and they also disconnect disadvantaged groups themselves from others that are on the same journey. Some of the key concepts of community psychology include ecology, prevention and promotion, community, power, inclusion, and commitment and depowerment. Now, one might wonder, what is depowerment? Well, depowerment is necessary when you're trying to rectify issues like racism, stigma, and other issues that come up for disadvantaged groups, because depowerment allows for those who are in power to be able to come to a level of equality with those who are disadvantaged. Listening to the stories of the disadvantaged is the first step to undoing the damage that has been done. Now I'd like to turn your attention to some key concepts and define them so that you have a better understanding in this conversation that I'm about to have with Sister Margari Hill, what is being discussed. So, for example, oppression is a key concept. What is oppression? Oppression is the state of domination where the oppressed suffer the consequences of deprivation, exclusion, discrimination, exploitation, control of culture, and sometimes even violence. However, they possess negative feelings and beliefs about historically disadvantaged groups, allowing social hierarchy to remain in place. Racism. Racism is the belief that all members of each race possess characteristics or abilities specific to that race so as to distinguish them either inferior or superior to others. I'd like to turn our attention to something that's slightly different, because a lot of us have seen overt racism. We've seen people called names, we've seen people treated badly, but one thing that we often miss is something called aversive racism. Aversive racism is when somebody asserts that they have egalitarian values. In other words, that they think that you and I are equal, but unconsciously they hold these anti-minority feelings. And they possess these negative feelings and beliefs about these historically disadvantaged groups to hold them in a certain hierarchy. Therefore, as aversive racists consciously sympathize with victims of past injustice, support racial equality, and regard themselves as non-prejudiced. However, again, as I stated before, they do so with the idea that they're still going to hold a particular social hierarchy in place. Another key term is called microaggressions. Microaggressions are of three types, but generally a microaggression is a brief and commonplace daily verbal or behavioral indignity, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicates hostile, derogatory, or negative racial slights and insults. Microaggressions can also be delivered environmentally through physical surroundings of targeted groups. So in other words, whereas you might understand microaggressions, again, as some kind of name calling or something, the environmental microaggression will actually create an environment that continues to keep that hierarchy in place. So for example, we see this in urban areas a lot, where we see liquor stores on every corner. That substance is put into the community to keep the community from functioning at a higher level. And this would be a type of environmental microaggression. The three types of microaggressions that exist are the following. One is called a microassault. This refers to blatant verbal or nonverbal environmental attacks. So again, a name calling would be a microassault, or putting things in the environment that keep people in a particular societal position would be a form of environmental attack. Another environmental attack example would be not having public transportation available to the community members. If people do not have resources where they can afford cars, and they also do not have public transportation, then society is able to keep them in a particular hierarchy because they don't have the resources. A second type of microaggression is a microinsult. A microinsult is the unintentional behaviors or comments that convey rudeness or insensitivity to a person's heritage or identity. So for example, somebody may make a comment that they didn't realize was of particular sensitivity to a group. Now, it's not necessarily intentionally meant to be rude, but it comes across as rude because they were unaware of the cultural ramifications of their comment. The third type of microaggression is a microinvalidation. Microinvalidations are verbal comments or behaviors that exclude, negate, or dismiss the psychological thoughts, feelings, or experiential reality of targeted groups, usually unintentional or unaware. Microinvalidations are pretty interesting because myself, being a minority within a minority, I have experienced microinvalidation from people who would not normally think that you would experience this with. Because you often see microinvalidations play out with minorities against other minorities. You can also see it, of course, with the dominant culture, but oftentimes we see these play out between minorities. I'd like to now look at the word stigma. What is stigma? A stigma is a mark of disgrace that sets a person apart. So an example of how stigma is used is that 3/4 of people with mental illness experience stigma. There are 3 types of stigma that I would like to bring your attention to. One is a physiological stigma. So sometimes people are treated based on their age. So we see something like ageism. Ageism would be a physiological example of a stigma. The second type are character blemishes. So for example, somebody who has an HIV status, this would be considered a character blemish in society, and they could be stigmatized for it. A third type is prejudice. And an example of this usually goes to one's tribal affiliation, or racial affiliation. And so we see prejudice born out of these associations, and people are stigmatized for them. There are 2 types of stigma that I would like to further bring your attention to. One is called felt stigma, and the other is enacted stigma. Felt stigma is an internalized perception of being devalued as not good as by another individual. In other words, when the person looks at themselves in the mirror, they think, I'm not as good as so-and-so because of some characteristic or affect of themselves that has been made, some characteristic or aspect of themselves where they have been made to feel by the dominant culture it's not good enough. And so that's an internalized perception of self, and we call that felt stigma. And acted stigma are behaviors and perceptions by others toward the individual who's perceived as different. So this would be from the outside, someone enacting their stigma toward a person. So we often refer to these as slights, but it doesn't always have to be a slight. It could be more overt. But for example, when two people are walking down the street and one feels that another is somehow ignoring them or treating them with less respect, this would be an example of enacted stigma. You might also see enacted stigmas more overtly, however, where we have seen in our recent history young men wearing hoodies, being attacked, being verbally attacked. This would be enacted stigma because there's an association with the hoodie as being some problematic dress for young African American males. At this time, I'm going to take a short break and bring in Margari Hill after the break to discuss these issues further with you. We'll be right back.
Hi, welcome to Adelante. This is Adelante Recovery, and my name is Yvette Kuglin, and I'm part of the staff.
Adelante Recovery Center has helped people in dual diagnosis for 5 years. We accept most PPO insurances and provide luxury accommodations and 24-hour support. To speak with an admissions counselor, call 1-888-242-4450.
A lot of time we don't even know what's wrong with us, and sometimes we need to get away to figure that out. So if you want to go for a little retreat out in Corona Del Mar, which is a confidential location, we're here to help. So we're only a phone call away. Thank you.
Welcome back to Muslims and Mental Health. I have with me now Sister Margari Hill. Sister Margari Hill is the co-founder of the Muslims Anti-Racism Collaborative, and she's also the acting programming director. She's the editor for altmuslima.com as of recent days, and I'm very happy and honored to have her with us today to continue our conversation on confronting racism in the African American Muslim community. Thank you for joining me, Sister Margari.
Thank you for having me.
I'd like to start our discussion today by asking you if you could tell the Muslim or the viewers, because this is actually for Muslims and non-Muslims, the dominant culture, everyone's able to see this, what Muslim ARC is. What is the point of Muslim ARC?
Okay, well, Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative is a group of concerned community members, scholars, activists, just regular people who would like to contribute to anti-racism work. We are a human rights education organization, and we focus on education, advocacy, and outreach.
Great. Sounds like a very interesting initiative. What made you want to start this initiative?
Well, I think it really started out of conversations online, and we were many of us were following Dawood Walid's his campaign. So he had this one-man campaign addressing anti-Black racism on Twitter. And so since many of us were following it online, and we actually didn't know each other, so we were spread out across the country. And Namira Islam, our other co-founder, she had sent out an email to encourage people to actually take proactive steps and maybe do a hashtag conversation. And I actually, when I got in contact with her, I convinced her, like, let's go farther and do some education programming. And from that, like, our ideas came together. And from that core group, we developed Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative and launched February 10th last year.
Okay. Well, that sounds like an amazing idea that you took from the internet into action. Just so our viewers know, Dawood Walid is the executive director of the Council on American Islamic Relations in Detroit, Michigan.
Yes.
And Sister Namira Islam, could you tell us a little bit more about her as well?
Sister Namira Islam, she also lives in Detroit, and she works in poverty law in Flint. And so her background in both poverty law, prison litigation, and also at the UN working on, she actually worked on genocide. And so like that work really had inspired her efforts in Muslim anti-racism, because she saw what was the kind of, what extent could it lead to, what extent could racism lead to, which could be genocide, and it's very frightening. But when we look at some of the racial discourse, even in America, towards Muslims, it's like, you know, how far off are we from that? And so it's very important for us to think about our situation as Muslims in America, but also how we treat each other.
So what would you like to see happen moving forward with the Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative?
Well, we'd love to, and we're actually working on more on-the-ground programming. We are working on organizing a leadership conference, and so this is a conference for Muslim leaders, for imams, for boards, members of masjid boards, and for people who work in nonprofits. To develop some type of anti-racism training. We hope that they can get some more cultural sensitivity, but also to be able to address anti-racism work within their own communities. And so we're organizing that in Southern California. So we're very excited, and we're hoping to solidify a date with our partners, with the Council of American Islamic Relations, LA, and Bayan.
Oh, okay, great. How do you see racism affecting the Muslim community, both within the Muslim community and then with the dominant culture?
Well, within the Muslim community, it definitely creates a lot of divisions. It's causing a lot of problems where we have members of our community who feel excluded. It's very difficult to confront Islamophobia when we're not united as a community. Mm-hmm. And so from that point, that racism within our community, it actually undermines us and our efforts. And within a broader society, we have our children who are affected by racism, and they're internalizing that. And so it's very important that we also uproot racism within our schools so that our children aren't internalizing racism and have self-image issues, that they can love themselves and also treat each other better.
So I had actually talked a little bit about this earlier in terms of enacting stigma and feeling stigma. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what you're talking about, I believe, right now. The internal feelings of feeling the stigma, and then the enacting stigma when others are projecting it onto the marginalized person or oppressed person in this case.
Well, we just finished a study. We completed a study where we collected about a sample size of over 500 participants, and 80% of the Muslims had experienced some type of discrimination.
Wow, that's
and
a lot
60% of the respondents said that they have experienced discrimination within, and this is racial and ethnic discrimination within the Muslim community. So this is really deeply affecting our community, and about 90-something%, I would say 93% of the respondents believe that education programming would actually help benefit our community as a whole.
So in community psychology, that's what we say. It's the first step. Listening to the stories of the disadvantaged is the first step to healing. And so this is amazing work that you're doing, and I agree with you. I think it's going to be a great step toward that healing. I would like to continue to ask, how do you see micro and macroaggressions playing a role in this?
Well, I think that what some of the more outstanding cases and what we get a lot of discussions are some of the microaggressions. There is a lot of focus on the interpersonal racism within the Muslim community, and so sometimes it could be those subtle things, those unintended things that people say. Like, for instance, we have like Americans, biracial Americans, and they're always asked, "Where are you from?" No, where are you from? And in fact, my husband, he gets that a lot, where, people kind of, and, or you get, like, oh, wow. And I've actually been told I'm articulate for a Black American, so that's another microaggression. It's like, well, what am I supposed to take that as a compliment?
And
or
a graduate of Stanford.
Yeah, so, and it's, you get that, or the surprise. And so I think with those kind of like those subtle things, it makes people feel uncomfortable. And sometimes it could be actually more outright, it could be actual insults that people experience. And so, and that usually happens with some of our younger people where some of the people, the youth attending the masjid, they're called, a racial slur or not accepted in a group. And so those interpersonal things, they actually affect people's spirituality, their feeling of belonging in the Muslim community. And so for us, we don't want to downplay the interpersonal because it does have such a deep effect. It causes trauma. It actually has had people walk away from the community. And when they walk away from the community, it becomes much more difficult for them to practice.
Now, I know that this is out of the scope of what we've been discussing, but since you brought this great point up, I just kind of want to elaborate if we can, so that the audience understands that this is not just an American issue. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Like with the doing anti-racism work within the Muslim community, we see that these patterns happen globally. So, and I had lived in Egypt, and so you may have, and there were some tensions with the Nubians, and there were actually people that were killed in conflicts between one of the Arab tribes and the Nubians. You also have in Sudan, the conflict in Darfur, the treatment of South Asians in the Gulf, issues of migration. And, so like our organization is very much interested in these discussions on a global scale. And in fact, when we've had hashtag conversations, we've had people to talk about the global anti-Blackness within the Muslim Ummah. And that's also something that's very important. And we've brought in the conversation to actually talk about also the marginalization of East Asians and Southeast Asians from the Muslim discourse. And so, like for us, it's not just a Black or white issue, it's not just U.S.-centric, but it's looking at us as a whole global community so that we could live by those ideals of as one ummah.
Well, this is just such wonderful work. I
Thank
would
you,
like to ask
mashallah.
you, what do you think can be done now to make a positive contribution to this issue?
Well, I think that education is definitely a key, and knowledge, but we also have to begin to inculcate that knowledge. We have to internalize it and practice it. And so I think Muslims having cultural sensitivity training can help people prevent them from enacting those microaggressions. I think that when people are aware that their actions are hurtful, and on a spiritual level, they're not in line with Islam, and that actually hurts the person who's perpetuating those microaggressions or looking down upon people. And so I think that addressing it, acknowledging that it exists, and taking proactive steps to educate people. And then there are some people who still want to hold on to those hierarchies. And in some ways, we actually have to maybe create a stigma towards those behaviors and say, like, that's not acceptable. And so we need to encourage our brothers and sisters to partake in bystander anti-racism, to stop it when they see it.
Okay. And your organization is a nonprofit, correct?
Yes, so we are in the process of incorporating. So this is all not for profit.
The reason I'm asking is because I was just, a thought occurred to me as we were discussing this, that a positive contribution could be an actual contribution to the organization, right?
Yes.
So I did want to let people know that the website's address is actually www.muslimarc.org. You can go out there and find out more information about the organization, and I think there's the ability to donate as well. Is that correct?
Well, I think we will be able to put up our PayPal this week, inshallah, because it took a long time for us to get our paperwork together so that we can get our official account. But we just incorporated, and we are in the process of going 501(c) and becoming a full-on nonprofit organization. So we're very excited about the steps that we're taking. But we are looking for support, and endorsement, and for people to actually take some of our pilot trainings. So we're very excited to roll those out, and we hope to have more trainings online that'll be very accessible for the general public, inshallah.
So now I'd like to turn to a tradition that we're going to start with our interview episodes, with some fun questions.
Okay.
And I wanted to ask you who your Muslim hero is, if you have one, and why you're your Muslim hero.
Well, my hero is, the first person that came to my head is Amina Matthews. And the reason why she is my hero is, she's battling cancer, and that anybody that's, fighting that, it's they're just our heroes, number one. Having your health is so important, and when you're, battling for your life, so, make dua for her. But her work on the street to stop violence on the street was just phenomenal. And when I saw the documentary and the work, how she put her life on the line to prevent young African American men from killing each other, that was just so powerful for me. So her battle with fighting cancer, and that also, her efforts was just, such powerful dawah. When she won that award on BET, I was like, that's exactly, that's the type of work we should be doing. Not pamphlets, but just doing our work, and for people to see that.
So just to mention, Amina Matthews is located in Chicago, and she's an activist who actively works in trying to get rid of the violence and the gang activity in Chicago, for those who may not be familiar with her. And there are lots of episodes on TV from PBS, I believe, and that talk about Amina's work, if you're interested in looking her up. So another question I have is, what is your favorite concept in Islam, and why?
I think the concept that really drew me to Islam, even before I knew the word, was taqwa. And not in the sense that a lot of people kind of understand it as, I love the idea of God consciousness, but the idea of taqwa as your good actions, of using those, lining up all your good actions to protect you from punishment, because we all do wrong, right? And so it's this idea that I can make amends by doing good deeds. And that was something that really, I saw that in an example of Malcolm X, where he lived a certain life, and then by his actions as being a very devout Muslim and really working in his activism, his good deeds still stand out to this day. And so the idea of taqwa, whether that's going to Hajj, praying, charity work, this constant action, was something that really drew me to Islam, which, I grew up as a Christian, so it really was much more profound for me that I could actually have this active way of saving myself from punishment, from hellfire. And that's just always been really amazing to me.
That's beautiful. So, and lastly, what is your favorite word and why?
I guess my favorite word is probably something that I hope for most is understanding, is to understand other people and for other people to understand me. And so when I'm misunderstood, that's something that's painful, but when I am understood, I feel connected. And so I feel that understanding is so important. And there's things I want to understand, but for me, it's like understanding humanity is so important. So I'd say that's my favorite word.
Okay. Well, I really want to thank you for joining us and enlightening us about Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative.
Thank you.
As well as the general issues around racism in our society and abroad. These are very important issues that we need to address, and I'm so grateful that people like you and yourself are out there advocating to change this. We really need this work.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for coming, and thank you for, maybe we'll see you again sometime.
Inshallah.
Thank you.